Wren had not meant to laugh at the king, she hadn't even known it was him. The corridor behind the great kitchens of Thornhill Keep was the kind of place nobody important ever walked. Low-ceilinged, smelling of tallow and wet stone, lit by a single guttering lamp that had needed trimming for a week. It was where Wren went when she wanted 3 minutes to herself. A heel of bread stolen from the morning bake, pressed into her apron pocket. So when a tall shape came around the corner and stepped square into the loop of rope she'd left coiled on the floor, the one she'd been meaning to hang for a fortnight, and went down with all the grace of a felled oak, arms wheeling, a sack of dried apples bursting across the flagstones like a hailstorm, she laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, bright and helpless, and utterly undignified, echoing off the stone until it filled the whole passage. She had a distinctive laugh. Everyone in the scullery said, so low and warm and then cracking suddenly high at the end, like it had tripped over itself. It was the laugh her mother used to hush in temple. It was the laugh that got her in trouble. And then the man lifted his head, and the lamplight caught his face, and Wren stopped laughing. She knew that face. Everyone in the 4 provinces knew that face, though most only from the coins stamped with his profile. The heavy dark brows, the scar that split one of them and vanished into the hairline. The eyes, pale, storm-colored, the gray of the sea, in the hour before it turns cruel. King Aldrich VIII of Thornhill, the silent wolf. The man who had refused 7 years of brides sent from every allied house in the realm, who had turned away princesses and warlords' daughters, and the sun priestess of Emerald herself, who, it was whispered, had not smiled once since the year his brother died. He was on the floor of the servants' corridor, tangled in her rope, surrounded by scattered apples, looking up at her. Wren's stomach dropped through the flagstones and kept going. She should kneel. She knew she should kneel. Some distant, sensible part of her was already screaming it. Down, girl, down, forehead to the stone, beg. But her knees had locked and her hands had flown to her mouth, and all she could manage was to stand there frozen. With the last of the laugh still dying in her throat, and her eyes going wide as saucers. She said. She could not find the word majesty. It had simply left her. The king said nothing. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, something so strange and stretched and searching that it frightened her more than anger would have. His chest was rising and falling too fast. One of his hands had come up, half open, pressed flat against the center of his own ribs, as though something in there had struck him, as though the fall had cracked something loose that had been sealed a very long time. Down the corridor, a door banged, footsteps, a voice she half recognized. The king's shadow, the tall grim one who followed him everywhere, calling a name that wasn't hers. Wren did the second thing she could do. She left the bread, she left the rope, she left the apples rolling, and she picked up her skirts and fled down the passage and through the low arch and into the steam and clatter of the kitchens, her heart slamming so hard she thought it might crack a rib of her own. She did not look back. If she had, she might have seen the strangest thing of all, stranger than a king, on the floor, stranger than the look on his face. She might have seen him laugh. It was barely anything. A single rough breath, forced out of a chest that had forgotten how, ugly and startled and disbelieving. It hurt him. You could see it hurt him, the way the first breath hurts a swimmer surfacing after too long under. He pressed his hand harder against his ribs. And under his skin, in the hollow place where for 7 years there had been nothing at all, no warmth, no scent, no stir of the beast that was supposed to live there, something ancient and half asleep, opened one eye. Her. The word came from a part of him he'd thought long silent. He didn't understand it. He only knew that the wolf, which had not spoken since the night his brother died in his arms, had spoken now, one word, in the dark, at the sound of a stranger's laugh. The grim man reached him and stopped dead at the sight of his king on the floor. Aldrich. He never used the name in the halls. He used it now. What happened? Are you hurt? The king let himself be pulled to his feet. He looked down the empty corridor where the girl had gone. His face had already closed again, gone still and gray as a shut door. But his hand stayed pressed to his chest, and it did not come away. "Find out who she is," he said. His voice had gone strange and rough. "The girl who is just here. Do not frighten her." "Do not tell her," I asked. "My king, find out who she is." Kale. He turned, and for the first time in 7 years, there was something in the storm-gray eyes that had no name. "And do not," he said quietly, "let her leave the keep." That night, in a narrow cot above the scullery, Wren lay awake with the blanket, hold to her chin, and stared at the rafters and tried to convince herself she had imagined it. She had laughed at the king. She had laughed at the king and run away. In the morning they would come for her. The guards, the irons, the long walk to whatever a scullery maid earned for mocking a wolf on the floor of his own house. She did not sleep. When the gray dawn came and someone knocked at the low door beneath her, soft and even and patient, she already knew, the way a hare knows, that it was for her. "You're wanted," said the steward when she crept down. His face gave away nothing. Up in the west tower, by the king's own man, Wren's blood turned to river water. "Am I to be punished?" she whispered. The steward looked at her for a long moment, and something in his eyes she couldn't name. Pity, or maybe the opposite of it. "I don't think," he said slowly, "that anyone knows yet what you're to be." To understand how a scullery maid came to laugh in a king's face, you have to understand that Wren had spent her whole life learning to be unseen, and had failed at it exactly once, and that once was now. She had come to Thornhill Keep at 11, half-starved, after the fever year took the last of her family in the fishing village of Sallow Reach down on the Grey Coast. There had been an aunt who was meant to keep her and hadn't wanted to. There had been a cart and a long road inland, and a woman at the keep gate who looked her over the way you'd look over a sack of turnips, and decided she'd do for the sculleries. That was 7 years ago. Wren had been 11 and the king had just stopped smiling, though of course she hadn't known that then. She hadn't known anything then except that the kitchens were warm and the work was endless, and if you kept your head down and your hands busy, nobody troubled you. She had gotten very good at keeping her head down. She was good with her hands too, better than a scullery maid needed to be. She could gut and bone a fish blind. She could mend a copper pot. She had a way of knowing when the bread was proofed, just by the smell of the air over the trough. The undercook, a vast kind mountain of a woman named Hesta, had noticed and moved her up from pot scrubbing to real work. And that had been the whole of Wren's ambition. To be useful enough to keep and quiet enough to forget. To take up no room. To cost no one anything. The laugh was the one thing she'd never managed to bury. It came out at the worst times. At funerals. At the exact wrong moment in temple. Not because she found those things funny, but because something in her broke loose when the world got too heavy and had to let out a sound. Hesta called it her curse and her blessing both. "That laugh of yours'll get you married or thrown out," she used to say, and I couldn't tell you which. Now, climbing the West Tower stairs behind a guard who wouldn't speak to her, Wren thought Hesta might have had the right of it after all, and the wrong half was winning. The room at the top was not what she expected, not a cell. A study, round, high-windowed, walls lined with maps and ledgers, a fire already lit against the coastal damp. And, waiting by the fire, tall and lean and grim as a gallows post, stood the man from the corridor, the king's shadow. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, though his eyes were old. He had the still, coiled way of a man who'd learned long ago never to waste a movement. When he looked at her, she felt weighed to the ounce. "Wren," he said. "Not a question. Of the sculleries. Late of Sallow Reach." "Yes, my lord." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm sorry, my lord. I didn't know it was him. The king." "I'd never have. I only left the rope out to hang it. I swear it. I never meant." "I'm not here about the rope." He gestured to a chair. She didn't take it. He didn't seem to mind. "My name is Seal Dorn. I am the king's beta and the master of his household guard. That is all you need to know of me." He studied her. What I need to know of you is rather more. I don't understand. No, he said, you wouldn't. And then, in the tone of a man laying a single card face up on a table and watching to see what it does. In the corridor, what did he do? Wren blinked, of all the questions. He nothing, he looked at me. He looked at me strange, my lord, like I'd struck him, and I ran. Shame flooded her. I know I shouldn't have run. I'll take whatever I've earned. But Seal Dorn wasn't listening to the apology. He'd gone very still, the way a hunter goes still, and something was working behind his old eyes. He looked at you, he repeated slowly, as though you'd struck him. Yes, my lord. And then I ran. I told you. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. He walked to the window and looked down over the gray courtyard, and when he spoke again, it was almost to himself. 7 years, he murmured. 7 years, and every healer, every priest, every witch we dared trust, and half a dozen we didn't, and it's a fish gutter with a rope she forgot to hang. He turned. Tell me, Wren, of Sallow Reach. Do you know why the king has taken no bride? Everyone knows the stories, my lord. Tell me one. She hesitated. They say, his heart died with his brother Prince. She stumbled on the name, corrected herself. Prince Torvald. They say the silent wolf can't love, because he buried it all in the crypt. 7 years back. She swallowed. Kitchen talk, my lord. I don't put stock in it. The kitchen, said Cale Dorn, is closer than the council. He came away from the window. I'm going to ask something of you, and you are not going to understand why, and I am not going to explain it. If you refuse, you'll go back to your pots, and no harm will come to you. You have my word, and my word is good. But if you agree. He paused, and for the first time something almost like hope cracked the grimness of his face. And it was a terrible thing to see, because it was so unpracticed. If you agree, you may find yourself in rooms a scullery maid has no business in. And you must tell no one. Not your undercook, not the girl in the next cot, no one. Wren's mouth had gone dry. Agree to what, my lord? To laugh, said Cale Dorn, in front of the king, once more. Where I can watch what happens. The fire popped. Somewhere below, a gull cried over the courtyard. Wren stared at the grimmest man she had ever met and understood, with a slow, cold prickle down her spine, that whatever was happening here, it was far larger and far stranger than a forgotten rope, and that she had already, without meaning to, stepped into the middle of it. Not on command. It doesn't come like that. Something flickered across Cale Dorn's face, and to her astonishment she realized it was fear. For all our sakes, he said quietly, you had best hope that it does. They brought her to him at dusk, in a small warm room off the king's private library, and told her almost nothing. Cale had coached her on the walk, up in a low, fast voice. She was to stand where she was put, speak only if spoken to, and above all, she was not to kneel or scrape, or my majesty him half to death, the way the court did. He gets enough of that, Cale said. It's not what we need. What they needed, apparently, was for Wren to simply be, to stand in a room with the most feared man in the realm, and behave as though he were a man and not a monument. Which was, she thought a little wildly, like being told to relax while balancing on a knife. The room had 2 chairs by a fire, and a long window going violet with the dying day. The king stood at that window with his back to the door, and he did not turn when she came in. Leave us, Cale, he said. My king, I'd rather, leave us. The door closed, and Wren was alone with the silent wolf. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Wren stood by the second chair with her hands knotted in her apron and studied the great still breadth of his back, and thought that she had never in her life been so aware of her own heartbeat. He was even larger up close than he'd seemed sprawled on the floor, a head and a half taller than her, shoulders like a doorframe, and there was a stillness to him that wasn't calm at all. It was the stillness of a held breath, of a man standing very carefully on the surface of something that might give way. They told you nothing, he said at last, not turning. It wasn't a question. No, you're... She caught Cale's warning. Left it off. No. They didn't. Good. A pause. Kale tells me your name is Wren. Yes, like the bird. My mother said I was small enough to fit in one hand when I was born. Your... She bit it off again. Her face went hot. Sir. She said she nearly called me nothing at all, and settled on the smallest bird she knew, and there, she heard it. The smallest breath went out of him, not a laugh, but the ghost of the place a laugh might come from. He turned around. In the firelight, his face was not the coin's face. It was tired, in a way coins never showed, carved hollow under the eyes, gray threading the dark hair at his temples, though he could not have been much past 30. But it was his eyes that undid her. They were fixed on her with a naked, disbelieving hunger that had nothing to do with wanting a woman, and everything to do with a starving man looking at bread through a window as if she were something he'd given up on, and here she was anyway. Say something to me, he said. His voice had dropped, low and rough. Anything. I don't care what. I don't, sir. I don't know what you want me to. That's not it. He took a step closer, and she made herself hold her ground the way Khaled had told her, and it was the hardest thing she'd ever done. In the corridor. You weren't trying. That was the whole of it. You weren't trying. Something desperate had come into him. Do it again. Whatever it was. But Wren, staring up at a king begging her to laugh, felt the laugh curl up somewhere deep in her chest and go still with sheer terror. Nothing was funny. Everything was terrifying. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out but a small, strangled sound of panic, and she saw the hope go out of his face like a snuffed wick, saw him turn gray and shuddered again, saw him step back and become the monument once more. That broke something loose in her. Because it was so sad, and because the whole thing was so absurd, a scullery maid ordered to laugh. A wolf king waiting on it like a verdict, the two of them standing in a violet room performing joy like a chore, and the sheer ridiculous grief of it struck the flint in her chest. And before she could stop it, it came. The laugh, low and warm, and cracking high at the end, where it tripped over itself. Helpless, real, the king staggered. He actually staggered, one hand flying to the mantel to catch himself, and his breath went out of him in a rush, and his eyes closed, and across his face passed something so enormous and so painful, and so much like relief, that Wren stopped laughing out of pure alarm and started forward with her hands out. Sir, your Majesty, are you ill? Should I call? No. His eyes opened, and they were wet. The silent wolf of Thornhill, the man who had refused a realm of brides, the terror of 4 provinces, stood with one hand white-knuckled on his own mantelpiece, and tears standing in his storm-gray eyes. And he looked at a fish gutter from Sallow Reach, as though she had reached into his chest and restarted a heart that had been stopped for 7 years. I felt it, he whispered, not to her, to something inside himself. Sally. Kyle. The door burst open. The beta was there in an instant, and behind him Wren shrank back 2 others, an old woman in the gray robes of a keep healer, and a younger man with the shaved head of a temple reader, all 3 of them crowding the doorway with the same expression, the exact same one that she was coming to dread, shock and hunger and something like fear. The king said to them, and his voice cracked on it, I felt it move. The old healer's hand went to her mouth. The temple reader had gone white. And Kyle Dorn looked at Wren over all their heads with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life, because it was the look of a man adrift at sea who has just seen, very far off, the smallest possible sail. What? Wren said into the silence, her voice very small, is wrong with all of you? That was the worst part. Nobody answered her at all. They only looked, the 4 of them, from her to their king and back again, as though she were a key that had turned up in a lock they'd stopped believing could ever open. The old healer was the one who finally spoke, and she didn't speak to Wren. She spoke to Kale low and shaking, and the words made no sense to Wren then, though they would come to mean everything. Seal the room, the healer said. Tell no one. If the wrong ears hear that, a scullery maid woke the wolf. She stopped, her old eyes cut to Wren, and filled, absurdly, with pity. Child! she said. Whatever they promised you when they brought you up here, forget it. You're not going back to the sculleries. Not now. Not ever. But I don't understand, Wren said, and heard her own voice climbing toward panic. I didn't do anything. I only laughed. I know, said the old woman softly. That's what frightens us. And the king, who had not taken his eyes from Wren once, not for a single heartbeat since the sound left her, said quietly, to no one, in a voice full of dawning and terror in equal measure, don't let her out of my sight. They kept her in a warm little room off the healer's still room that night, and nobody would tell her why, and Wren did not sleep at all. In the morning, the old healer came for her. Her name, she said, was Marin Vosk, and she had served the house of Varen since before Aldrich was born, and she was going to tell Wren the truth, because pretending otherwise had become more dangerous than the truth itself. She sat Wren down at a scrubbed table with a cup of something hot and bitter, and looked at her with those pitying eyes and began, "What do you know," Marin said, "about a wolf's second soul?" "Nothing, mistress. I'm coast-born. We don't have the shifting blood down in Sallow Reach. No, most common folk don't. But the king does, and every high house does, and it's the whole of what makes them what they are." Marin wrapped her knotted hands around her own cup. Inside every shifter there's a second self, the beast, the wolf. It's not a costume he puts on, it's half his soul, the half that feels, it scents, it hungers, it grieves, it takes joy. A wolf without his beast is a lamp without a flame. He'll walk and talk and rule, and no one at 10 paces will know the difference. Her voice dropped. But he's fading, all the same. Slowly from the inside, like a tree that's been ringed. Wren's cup had gone still halfway to her mouth. And the king, 7 years ago, said Marin. On the night his brother died, King Aldrich's wolf went silent. Not gone, silent. It stopped scenting. It stopped speaking. It stopped feeling anything at all. He hasn't smelled the sea, or tasted his wine, or felt the warmth of a fire on his skin in 7 years. Child, he hasn't wept. He hasn't laughed. She held Wren's eyes. He hasn't wanted a woman, which is why he's turned away every bride the realm has thrown at him. Not from grief, whatever the kitchens say, but because the part of him that could want anything at all went dark and never lit again. That's why the brides, Wren whispered. It fell into place with a soft, terrible click. 7 years of brides. He wasn't refusing them. He couldn't. He couldn't feel them, Marin said. A shifter chooses a mate by scent, by the wolf's knowing. His wolf has known nothing for 7 years. To take a bride he couldn't scent would have been a lie in the sight of the gods. And whatever else that man is, he does not lie. So he said no, and no, and no. For 7 years. She leaned in, and every year the wolf sinks deeper, and every year he fades a little more. And we have tried everything, Wren. Every herb in my stores, every prayer the readers know. 2 witches we should have driven off, and didn't, because we were desperate. Nothing. Nothing has ever reached the wolf. Nothing has made it so much as stir. The room was very quiet. Until, Wren said. Until a fish gutter left a robe on the floor, said Marin Vosk, and laughed. Wren set the cup down very carefully, because her hands had started to shake. That's not, mistress, that's not possible. People laugh at him, surely. In 7 years people laugh near him, people laugh for him, the sly little laughs of court, the ones that want something. The old woman shook her head slowly. No one laughs at him. No one has laughed at that man without fear, in the sound of it since the day he took the crown. Do you understand? It wasn't the laugh. It was that you didn't know to be afraid. She reached across the table and took Wren's cold hand in her warm one. For one heartbeat in that corridor, you treated the silent wolf like an ordinary man who'd tripped over a rope. And something in him that had been starving for 7 years reached for it. Wren pulled her hand back without meaning to. I want to go home, she said, and heard how small it sounded. I want to go back to the kitchens. I don't want to be, whatever this is. I'm nobody, mistress. You've got the wrong girl. I fix pots. I know. Marin's voice was gentle and it was merciless. I know you do. But listen to me now, because this is the part that matters. She waited until Ren looked at her. Seal Dorn has watched that man fade for 7 years, and made his peace with losing him. Last night he watched the wolf move for the first time since the crypt. He is not going to let you go, child. Not because he's cruel, he's the least cruel man in this keep, but because you are the only thread of hope he has held in 7 years. And a man holding his last hope does not open his hand. She sat back. The kindest thing I can do for you is tell you the truth. So you stop waiting to be sent home. You're not being sent home. The only question left is what kind of thing you'll agree to become. Before Ren could answer, the door opened without a knock, and Kale Dorn stood in it. And his grim face was doing something it had plainly not done in a long while, and had forgotten how. It was trying to be gentle. He slept, Kale said. Marin went still. What? Last night, after you sent the girl to the still room. Kale's voice was low and strange. I sat with him as I do. He was at the window, and past the middle bell, he laughed. Once. Under his breath, at nothing, like a man remembering something. And then he went to his bed, and he slept. Marin. Through the night. No pacing. No standing at the glass till dawn. He looked at Ren, and there was that terrible, unpracticed hope again. He hasn't slept a whole night through in 7 years. Not once. And she was 2 doors down. The old healer rose slowly to her feet, one hand on the table as though the floor had tilted. 2 doors down, she repeated. Not even in the room. Not even in the room. They both turned to look at Ren, and Ren looked back at them, and the hot bitter cup steamed between her hands. And outside, a gull cried over the gray courtyard, and she understood with a sick lurch that whatever door had opened last night, it was not one she was going to be allowed to walk back out of. How long? Marin said quietly. Not to Ren, to Kale. Did the readers give him? Before, your honest count. Kale Dorn's jaw worked. For a moment, Ren thought he wouldn't answer. Before the year turns, he said. They gave him to the turn of the year, and the year's already dying, Marin. The first frost was on the courtyard this morning. Ren looked from one grave old face to the other. That's weeks, she said faintly. A season, at the most? Yes, said Kale. It is, and he's fading faster now, not slower. The readers can't account for it. A dying flame ought to gutter slow. His old eyes, fixed on her. His is guttering like something's blowing on it. There was no ceremony to it, no royal command sealed in wax. There was only Seal Dorn walking her up through the west tower that evening, and stopping outside a door she'd never seen, and saying, in the flat voice of a man who has decided something and will not be argued out of it, "You'll sit with him in the evenings. That's all. You'll sit in the room and be yourself, and we'll see what the wolf does." A pause. "You will be safe. You have my word, and I have never yet broken it. But you will do this, Ren, and if I say no?" Kale looked at her for a long moment. "Then you say no," he said, "and I'll not lay a hand on you. And I'll go back in there and watch him fade by the turn of the year, knowing there was a thread I didn't pull because the girl who held it was afraid. And I'll not blame you for it." He opened the door. "That's the whole of the threat, if you were waiting for one. I've no irons, only a fading man and a wanting." It was, Ren thought, a far worse threat than irons. She went in. The king's private sitting room was smaller and plainer than she'd imagined a king's rooms would be. A good fire, 2 deep chairs, books in stacks on the floor, like a man who'd stopped pretending he had a system. He was in one of the chairs when she entered, and he rose when he saw her, which so astonished her that she nearly walked back out. Kings did not rise for scullery maids. "Sit," he said, gesturing at the other chair, and then, catching himself, more roughly, "If you want, you needn't." "I only meant," he stopped, ran a hand down his face. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, and the plainness of it from him was staggering. "I've forgotten how to be in a room with someone who isn't afraid of me. If you are afraid and you'd be a fool not to be, I'd ask you to try to forget it for an hour. That's the whole of what I want. An hour of someone forgetting." So, Ren sat. The first evening was agony. She perched on the edge of the great chair like a bird, ready to bolt, and answered his careful questions in single words, and he asked them like a man handling something he was sure to break, and the wolf did nothing at all. And when Kyle came to fetch her at the middle bell, the king's face had gone gray with the disappointment he was trying not to show. Wren walked back to the still room, feeling that she had failed at a thing she hadn't wanted and couldn't do, and lay awake ashamed of caring. The second evening was a little better. He asked about Sallow Reach, and she found herself telling him about the coast. The gray water, the gull cliffs, the way the whole village smelled of salt and tar and split fish, so strong you stopped smelling it after a week, and then missed it your whole life once you'd left. And the king went very still and closed his eyes, and she thought she'd bored him, and stopped. "Don't stop," he said, eyes shut.